Keith was wondering, how could I bring the entire room down? He thought I'll invite a lawyer to talk about AI. So I'll try not to be too much of a Debbie Downer. I actually think that the regulations and the law is allowing for a lot of innovation right now, and that can be a good or a bad thing, depending on how you're looking at it. And so my goal very quickly is going to be just to really tee up what is going on in the world of regulation around AI. And I really like to frame it this way. And the question is, do we regulate or do we not regulate? And this is the dynamic that we're seeing play out across the globe right now. And I'm going to specifically look at sort of the EU and the US because we're seeing us fall on different sides of this discussion to sort of illuminate the challenges that we're seeing right now when it comes to regulating AI. So on the sort of regulation side, I don't think this will come as a shock for many of you that follow what's going on in the EU. It's a heavy regulation area. They came out with the GDPR on data privacy in 2018. And they were the first movers when it came to a comprehensive AI regulation, which is currently in effect right now. So this is an active and in-play regulation. If you are doing business in Europe and you are leveraging AI tools, you need to be complying with this regulation. Interestingly, unlike the GDPR, which I think saw this massive sort of global adoption of the regulation across a number of different jurisdictions, we have not seen that same adoption of the EU's AI approach. And I think that's why we're seeing this sort of, are we going to regulate, are we not going to regulate, are we currently regulating and don't even realize we're regulating, et cetera. But the EU, I would say, is the most dominant force on the heavy side of we need to regulate AI because we need to protect individuals from potential ramifications of what this is going to look like. But the EU is not the only mover in this space, and the US has certainly engaged at the state level. So we have Colorado, which was really the first state in the United States that adopted a comprehensive AI regulation. Interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, there was a last-minute attempt to push the enforcement date of this back, recognizing that there's a lot of turmoil around whether or not we regulate, but as of right now, it still goes into effect in 2026. And then just in the last week or so, Texas joined the discussion by adopting their Responsible AI Act. I think it's interesting, they're calling theirs the Responsible AI Act, right? So Colorado has just the AI Act. And so you can see there's these little tweaks of how they're looking at it. So we have sort of all of this going on the side of regulation. We also have California, because California can never be left behind when it comes to any of these conversations. And they're approaching this a little bit differently, but still regulating AI. They're calling it automated decision-making technology. And they're looking at AI if it includes personal information. So it's a little more limited in scale, but it is something that's pending right now. The California Privacy Protection Agency is looking to adopt it by the end of this year, meaning that if you're doing automated decision-making technology, which is how they're framing up kind of AI, it's going to be regulated in California. But unfortunately, that's not the end of the story, and this is how lawyers keep their jobs, because it gets very more complex when we look at the to not regulate side of this. And I think many of you have probably heard about the One Big Beautiful Bill that is currently pending in the Senate. And embedded in this bill, or there's a number of things, is this moratorium on the enforcement of any act that impacts AI. And we do not know, obviously, if this is going to pass. It's not currently passed across both the House and the Senate. Only the House has passed it. We also don't really know what this is going to mean and how this is going to affect state regulation. And the reason I say that is I think that we could see those two prior states, Colorado and Texas, this is going to probably directly impact them. But there's other laws out there that impact AI. And so it's important to recognize that it's going to be very complex in the way in which this is going to potentially impact AI. And whether this actually gets passed is itself sort of a big unknown. And then at the same time, with the transition from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, we saw a huge shift in the executive branch approach to AI. Under the Biden administration, we had an executive order that was calling for responsible development of AI and oversight. Under the Trump administration, we have a very big focus on removing barriers to AI and to really allowing innovation to succeed. And I think you can look at this from a number of different lenses. There's an economic lens, there's a geopolitical lens. A lot of folks talk about an AI Cold War with China right now. And so we see a lot of that impacting these more executive level decisions, and we've seen this huge shift. I think it's interesting, if you look back, there was an EU summit on AI back in February, and it was originally called sort of Safety for AI, and then it was quickly changed to an Innovate for AI conference, the name of the conference. So we do see sort of, even at the EU level, some recognition that regulating this space might be too aggressive, and we need to pull back. And then there's sort of areas that I would say we should be mindful of, because as we sit here today, even if you're not subject to an AI regulation, you might be subject to other laws that have previously existed that are impacting the use of AI. So examples of these are the FTC, which is a consumer protection agency at the federal level. They regulate unfair or deceptive trade practices or antitrust laws. And they have gone after AI uses and fined businesses for using AI in deceptive ways. So you still need to comply with the FTC guidance when it comes to the use of AI. We also have state AG consumer protection laws. So in a similar way, they're going after businesses to protect consumers around the use of AI, often around deceptive or unfair trade practices. We have data protection and privacy legislation. If your AI is in any way ingesting personal information, personal data, PII, however you want to call it, it is going to be potentially subjecting the AI tool to these data privacy laws. There is no exception for AI, there's no carve out for AI, and frankly, we don't really understand how these laws are going to be interpreted in the AI context, because there's areas, for example, data deletion, where there's just the inherent conflicts if you ingest it into a model. We have contractual requirements. So I have seen a huge uptick in contracts where there's a push from businesses down to their vendors to say you can't be using AI if you're using our data, or if you are, you're going to rep and warrant that if we get regulatory fines, you're going to cover those fines. So looking at those contractual requirements, those are going to be just as much in play, even if you're not subject to a direct regulation. Consumer lawsuits, so we are seeing an uptick in class action lawsuits around the use of AI. So a failure to notify individuals, a failure for those individuals to have certain rights around AI, et cetera. And I think we're only going to see that uptick because the most creative area of the bar is the plaintiffs' firms. And so they will look for opportunities to find liability. And then finally, intellectual property. This is a little bit to the side of a lot of the consumer protection, but we still have so much going on the IP front. So if you're dealing with confidential or intellectual property information and AI, it is very challenging to find a clean path forward with how the regulations and the courts are really shaking out on this. So where does this leave businesses and how to move forward with AI? I think it's not realistic for everyone to stop and pause and wait for the many different legislatures to work out how they're going to look at AI. That's just not realistic. But I do think recognizing that whether it's today, tomorrow, 10 years, that the laws are somehow going to catch up to this, and they are going to want to regulate in some form or fashion on AI is really important, because we all know the quickest, the easiest, the most cost-effective way to deal with compliance, to deal with legal requirements, is before you start using the tool. As soon as you start ingesting data into that tool, leveraging it for your businesses, it's going to be so much harder to put those controls in place, to understand those risks, and to pull back. So I think we're at a unique time where, yes, we have this weird dynamic globally where we have sort of a push for regulation on one side, we're pulling back on regulation on the other. I still think it's really important for businesses to be thinking about these regulations as they're starting to increase their use of AI. And specifically, understanding your contract risk. I think this, outside of even the regulatory area, is your biggest risk, because every contract in the technology space is now having a clause around AI. Can you use it? Can't you use it? If you can use it, what data can go into it? If you can't, what exactly do those restrictions look like? Looking at things like de-identified data, analytic data, et cetera. It's really important to be very mindful of your contracts and what you agreed to before your team says, this is a fancy new AI tool, let me just dump everything I have into it, which they're all doing, by the way, right? Shadow AI usage is a real thing. But it's really important to look at those contractual terms. That's probably going to push you more towards a certain direction than even the regulations at this point. And then finally, the regulatory risk, right? Just because we have this potential moratorium out there, I don't think California, Colorado, and Texas are really going to pull 100% back on how they're going to regulate this, right? Especially not California. It's very aggressive in this space. It has a lot of technology companies. So there is still going to be some form of regulatory risk, and especially for non-AI regulation. So we see this huge push across the board for privacy regulators to really be enforcing their privacy laws. We have 19 states with privacy laws. More are going to be coming, and we're only going to see them want to find ways to use privacy laws to impact the use of AI. Data minimization is a huge part of a lot of these laws. So thinking before you ingest data is going to be really key. And AI is a data-hungry technology. So in a lot of ways, we see a real tension point between these data minimization requirements and AI. Think before you implement, and honestly, just awareness is key. If you want to use AI, if you want to dump all the data in there, that's your business decision. But I think you should be doing it with the knowledge that there's going to be risk that you're taking on. And that risk is probably going to change drastically over the next 18, 24 months, and it's important for you to be aware. So again, I tried to really quickly give you sort of a very high overview, and like I said, the easiest and most affordable time is to do it now before you start leveraging the AI tool. So appreciate everyone's time today, and if you want to connect, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, but I'll hand it back over to Keith.